Gray Penner was on page 120 of Clive Cussler's new novel when he heard his wife's car finally pull into the garage. He touched his Fitbit fitness watch and saw the time. 8:17 p.m. He cringed. It was the third time this week his wife had been late for work. Until 4 months ago, in all 7 years of their marriage, she had never once come home late. Gray wasn't born yesterday or the day before. The first few times Kelly called to let him know about the delay, he didn't think anything of it. Then he noticed that one night when she came home later than usual, her lipstick was slightly smeared, which was almost unheard of since Kelly was practically obsessed with her appearance. He was sure he'd noted the foreign scent of aftershave when she'd leaned in to kiss him, so that night in bed, he deliberately nuzzled her neck as he stroked her from behind with a spoon. He didn't know much about scents, but he knew there was a significant difference between the White Shoulders perfume he'd bought her and what the hell she smelled like. Damn. Gray nearly aghast when his red-haired wife walked through the door. In his 30s, he felt she was still as beautiful as when he'd first seen her in college, and his almost convulsive sigh was his usual reaction every time he saw her after being apart for a few hours or more. As they entered the house, Kelly smiled to herself as she saw her husband's usual reaction. She knew his reaction was a sincere compliment, and besides, she had to admit to herself that it turned her on that her husband found her attractive so soon after touching another man's lips. "Hi, honey," she said as she pulled herself closer to him, kissed him quickly on the lips, and turned to head upstairs, her now invisible smirk both confident and condescending. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll be down in a minute." Gray didn't say a word while his wife went in and upstairs, and she didn't seem to notice. He noted, however, the familiar odor of aftershave. Not for the first time, as he walked up the stairs, he furrowed his brow, anticipating the confrontation that was coming soon if he wanted to save his marriage. For the moment, Gray was certain that his wife had not yet crossed the line into a relationship with the handsome Paco Rabanne, as he referred to her potential seducer in his mind, but in his opinion, she was getting close. For 7 years, Gray feared that his beautiful wife would one day realize that she had married a man unworthy of her in terms of aesthetics and would try to make amends. Gray didn't consider himself an ugly man, but in his opinion, he was of average looks and in no way could compare to his stunningly beautiful wife. The serpent who invaded the Garden of Eden was named Johann Wegman. Kelly worked as an assistant vice president for an international telecommunications company. Johann was a well-built 40-year-old blonde man who had transferred to the job about 6 months ago from the firm's headquarters in the Netherlands. For the first 2 weeks, Gray heard far more about the Dutch displaced man than he wanted to before Kelly went completely silent. Gray became suspicious. "Hey, is this new Dutchman still working in your office?" Gray asked one night at dinner as Kelly recounted her day. "Yes, why do you ask?" Somewhat embarrassed, she replied, "For weeks he was the only one you talked about, and now it's like he's completely disappeared," Gray said. "Well, he works in another department. We don't see each other much," she said, and her face flushed slightly. "Ha," Gray muttered, stuffing his mouth with food and noticing that his wife had just lied to his face. It wasn't long after that the late nights began. Kelly had felt physically attracted to the 6'3", 102-pound Dutchman from the first moment she met him. In addition to his physical attractiveness, he exuded a self-confidence almost bordering on arrogance. He spoke 3 languages and possessed dark blue eyes that Kelly felt stared into her soul every time he looked at her. To be honest, she had to admit that the first time Johann had smiled at her, she had felt aroused. Kelly and Johann didn't actually work in different departments, and they socialized quite often for work. Within a couple weeks of Johann joining the company, the two of them started going out to lunch together. Kelly loved her husband and didn't even think about the fact that she and Johann were starting a relationship. Johann, for his part, was well aware that his relationship with Kelly was developing because he was gently nudging her towards it. Johann knew the woman was married, but assumed she would let him know if he went too far. In his country, extramarital affairs were not anathema. 2 weeks later, they were working on a project that they hadn't finished by the end of the day. Johann suggested that they tackle the project again in the morning, or just take some extra time in the evening at the office. Her smile told him all he needed to know. She quickly called Gray at his office and let him know she would be a couple hours late. He noted to himself that this was the first time she had been late in all his years with the company, but since he had to work late sometimes, too, he didn't complain and said he would make dinner that evening. She marveled at how attentive he was. They left the office at 7 o'clock, although they finished work at about 6:30. Both kept track of time. Working, or rather staying up late, had become a habit for the couple, at first spending time talking. Then it escalated to touching, hugging, and kissing. Kelly was well aware she was teetering on the edge of a slippery slope, but she loved having a husband and boyfriend. In fact, she was so caught up in her feelings that she either didn't notice or didn't care that her husband noticed. After graduating from college, Gray had gotten a good position with a nice salary at a small local telecommunications firm. Kelly, who had the same education as Gray, started working in a less senior position, but at an international firm. They planned not to have children until they were in their 30s. They also soon decided that Kelly would be the first to return to an online college to earn a master's degree in business and advance in her company. After she earned her master's degree, it would be Gray's turn so he could advance his career as well. Kelly earned her master's degree in 4 years and soon received a promotion that resulted in a higher salary and position in the company than her husband. He was very proud of his wife and was pleased that their career development plan was working. Preoccupied with her own financial and personal success, Kelly lost sight of their overall marital plan. When it was Gray's turn to get his master's degree, she stated that they should instead use the money to buy a house in which to raise their children. Gray was unhappy that his dreams were not at the forefront of his mind, but had to admit that buying a house for their future family was a good idea. He could always go back to college in a couple years, she reminded him. Kelly always came up with something serious for the couple to spend their money on, not Gray's MBA. He didn't want to seem selfish, so he always went along with his wife's wishes. Kelly's ego loved the fact that she was the primary breadwinner for the family and that she had the biggest job in their couple. She began to see herself as the more equal among two equal partners. As Kelly walked down the stairs, butterflies fluttered in her stomach. She loves her husband, but she needs Johan. She needs to feel him inside her. She needs to spend nights with him. She needs to snuggle up to him after sex. But she couldn't cheat on her husband, and she must tell him first so it wouldn't be cheating. She knew he loved her as much as she loved him, and would give her this one weekend was permission to have sex on the side. He'd never denied her anything. "Dinner's in the microwave. You just need to turn it on for a minute," Gray said when Kelly appeared downstairs. "Thanks, babe. I'll bring it all up in a minute." "Can we talk?" she asked. Gray looked up from his book. Dirk Pitt is going to have to wait. Gray realized that Kelly had something important to say. Did it have anything to do with what he wanted to talk to her about soon? I want a free pass for this weekend, Gray," Kelly said hesitantly but clearly. Gray froze in his seat on the couch. His brain kicked into overdrive. He hoped he didn't look as stunned as he felt. He felt like his insides wanted to burst out. "Excuse me?" he asked, realizing that he had actually heard his wife correctly. "I need to spend the whole weekend with Johan Wegman," she replied. "We have feelings that need to be tested. Once, just once. I love you, Gray, not him, and after this weekend I will come back to you and spend the rest of my life showing you how much I love you." Gray felt even more nauseous, realizing that Kelly had ruined their marriage with her question. Nevertheless, he decided that this tragedy needed to be played out to the end. What if after this weekend you decide that once isn't enough? What if you decide you need him for more than one weekend? What if you decide you need him more than you need me? "That's not going to happen. I promise," she said quickly. "You do? How can you promise something like that? 12 years ago, you already promised me, you swore that you would leave everyone else for me, and now you're going to break that promise easily." She blushed again and looked anywhere but directly at him. "I need this, Gray, and I know you love me enough to give it to me," she whispered. "To be clear, Kelly, you don't need it, but you definitely want it, and you're hoping I'll be stupid enough to give it to you." It's not going to happen, he reiterated. But I don't own you, so if you really want it, you can do it. Just remember, for every action, there's an equal counteraction. Thank you, Gray. I'm glad you understand, Kelly said. No, baby. Don't try to pretend like you misunderstood me. I just told you to do what you think you should do, and then I'll do what I should do, he said. Whatever you say, she replied. When Gray walked through the door the next evening, Kelly was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. As he entered, he noticed a small bag standing near the door. She's definitely dressed for the evening, he thought, noticing that she was wearing one of her sexiest dresses, a cornflower blue mid-thigh dress that showed a lot of cleavage. You seem pretty confident, Gray said, putting his keys and wallet on the shelf. She smiled flirtatiously. I'm confident in my beloved husband, she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. Now kiss me goodbye and have a good weekend. Don't pout, she said. Gray wanted to grab her arms and shake her until her head fell off. Instead, he gave her the saddest smile and shook his head. God, I loved you so much, baby, he whispered, turned and went upstairs. Though she realized he hadn't kissed her goodbye, Kelly, on her way out, didn't pay attention to Gray's use of the past tense of the word love. Her thoughts were already miles away, where Johan was waiting for her arrival. She felt like a 16-year-old virgin about to attend her first prom. Kelly and Johan had been planning their weekend getaway for the past 2 weeks. After 3 months of increasingly frequent kissing and caressing, they decided it was time to see where their relationship would lead. Johan didn't mind that Kelly was married. She told him that she and her husband were working through some issues in their marriage. She met Johan in the hotel lobby, and they checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Johan Wegman. They went up to their room and dropped their bags. Before leaving the room, Johan asked Kelly to spin around in front of him. He whistled softly in response and then pulled her to him for a deep, passionate kiss. God, this man knows how to kiss, she thought. Their table at the upscale steakhouse was booked for 7 o'clock that evening, so they had to unpack and head out. Dinner had been delicious. They each had a bottle of good wine, but only one because they both wanted to be on top of their game. For dessert, they each took an ice cream cone. During the meal, they talked in low voices, enjoying each other's company. They touched each other gently. To any observer, they looked like a very much in love married couple. Near Gray's reclining chair, a snack table held the remains of a medium-sized pepperoni pizza and 4 empty beer bottles. Although Gray was quite an accomplished cook, he certainly wasn't going to cook this evening. Upon reflection, he decided that pizza and beer would be the perfect meal on a night when his wife would be giving her body to another man. Finished with his meal, Gray went upstairs to the bedroom with several large garbage bags. He spent the next 30 minutes haphazardly bagging all of Kelly's clothes and then went downstairs and compiled them by the front door. He handled the jewelry and toiletries a little more carefully, folding them into a box and placing them by the door as well. Satisfied to a degree and indescribably angry, Gray went downstairs, inserted a DVD into the player, and sat down to watch his favorite movie of all time, the Mel Brooks classic, Young Frankenstein. Kelly and Johan had barely made it back to their room when he pressed his lips to hers. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and they stood for about a minute, kissing passionately. "We have 2 whole days. There's no need to rush," she whispered. They had been at it for about 2 hours. Kelly slowly got out of bed and went into the shower. When Kelly returned to the room, Johan was already asleep. Kelly promised herself that she wouldn't compare Johan to Gray this weekend, believing that her husband couldn't compare to him, partly because Johan was new and different, not to mention illegal. The next day, Saturday, the couple had a full day of activity planned before another sumptuous dinner followed by carnal pleasures. Kelly hoped that the previous night was just a one-time thing. Gray spent all of Saturday afternoon alone, not even turning on the television until the sun went down. No matter how much he considered his dilemma, he saw no way to stay married to his wife. He knew he still loved her. That didn't disappear overnight. But he couldn't put up with the disrespect she'd shown him lately, and would never be able to trust her again, expecting her, when she wanted to screw some other guy, to demand a free pass again. On the screen in front of him was a rerun of the show, Leave It to Beaver. But it could have been an adult movie instead, if Gray wanted it, and it was there. He took another sip of his beer and stared straight ahead, returning his thoughts to happier times with Kelly. Truth be told, Gray never realized how they'd ended up together. As students in the same class at Arizona State University, they'd taken a few courses together, but Gray hadn't even realized that this stunning girl might know who he was. She always seemed to have a small circle of admirers, but at the beginning of their freshman year, she took the seat next to him in his accounting class. She seemed to go out of her way to flirt with him during class and completely shocked him by asking him out for coffee when class was over. Of course, the young man accepted. For the rest of their college years, they were practically inseparable and married about 6 months after graduation. Until a few months ago, Gray was sure that their relationship was for the long haul. However, recent events showed that cracks had appeared in their marriage, and then Kelly did the unthinkable. Kelly lay in bed next to a sleeping Johann, wondering how much sucking up she would have to do to get her husband to forgive her for the untimely weekend. She could hear the words her husband had said to her when she had asked and told about the permission for a free pass, but knew that Gray loved her too much to let any weekend ruin their marriage. However, she also never thought she would have to worry about her husband while she was with Johann. That Saturday night, after a pleasant day out on the town, they had slept together. Twice. The day spent with Johann had been wonderful. He had lovely manners and a great personal charm, but when they returned to the room for the second night, it was as if his charm had deserted him again. He was selfish and axe-headed again, even though the woman was once again giving him the benefit of the doubt. She wouldn't even call what they were doing sex. Yes, Johann was trying to be physically active, but it was more like the in-and-out movements of a saw than anything else, and he wasn't, in her opinion, caring about his partner at all. And for this, I pissed Gray off, she thought to herself. God, what an idiot I am. After shower sex and a nice late breakfast, Johann was smiling as he and Mrs. Wegman drove out of the hotel. All the while, Kelly was gracious and smiling. They kissed passionately in the parking lot. Kelly thought it was the most passionate part of the weekend, then got into their cars and drove home. Kelly took advantage of the hour-long drive home to clear her head and strengthen her position in the long argument with her husband over her free pass permit. She was confident that Gray would eventually relent, despite his initial anger and threats. After all, she almost always got her way. Worst-case scenario, she thought, she'd order sexy lingerie and stiletto shoes, and maybe a leather bustier. She couldn't help but smile at the thought of how easy it was to fool a man. Kelly pulled the car into the garage and turned off the engine. She checked her makeup one more time in the rearview mirror, grabbed her bag from the back seat, took a deep breath, and walked proudly into the house. "Hey, I'm home!" she shouted, entering the kitchen from the garage. She waited a couple seconds for Gray to greet her, which would have been fine, but she was in for a disappointment. She heard the big screen on in the living room and walked in, annoyed at what she thought was her husband's childish behavior. Gray was sitting in his recliner watching a baseball game. He looked away from the screen for a second and nodded toward his wife without paying any attention to her. Needless to say, she wasn't happy. "Is that how you're going to play this out?" "Fine," she pouted and walked out of the room. What the hell do all those bags by the front door mean?" she shouted. When Gray didn't answer, Kelly walked over and opened the package. He heard her aghast, then heard other packages being opened. "Holy crap! This isn't funny, Gray! What the hell are you doing?" she was yelling. "To make it easier for you to move out when I hand you the divorce papers," he replied, surprising her by silently walking almost right up to her. "No divorce. There's not going to be a divorce, you moron," she said. "We talked about this. It's just one weekend. One. We've been married 12 years. You can give me one weekend. First of all, we didn't talk about it. You were talking and I was listening. You told me you were taking permission to have an affair. When it was my turn to talk, I said I wasn't going to take it. It's not my problem that you didn't take me seriously. We're married. That means no solutions. Never," Gray said. "You're actually going to divorce me over one weekend out of all the time we've been together? And all the time we'll be together in the future? She asked, panic now sounding in her voice. We're not going to be together in the future as long as you acted like it. I told you that. Which word of I'll do what I have to do, didn't you understand? Gray growled. Tears streamed from Kelly's eyes. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, Gray didn't pull himself close to his wife to comfort her. You cheated on me with another man. Just because you told me first doesn't mean it wasn't cheating, especially after I told you not to do it, Gray said. You didn't tell me not to do it. You said I could make my own choices, she said, trying to turn the argument around. And be responsible for the consequences of my actions. You only seem to be able to remember what you want to remember, Gray said. Kelly literally stomped around for a few seconds, looking at her things in the bags. She was breathing heavily. Well, I'm not moving out. It's my house, too, she said. Okay, but since your stuff is already packed, you can move your stuff into the guest room. I'm staying in the master suite, Gray said. Okay, she grumbled and carried the bags up the stairs. Will you help me? I've already done my part, he replied. I've already packed. No. Gray went back into the living room and continued watching the baseball game. He could hear his wife stomping up the stairs and mumbling something. Finally downstairs, Kelly plopped down on the living room couch and began leafing through the Sunday paper that Gray had placed on the end table next to where she usually sat. She began leafing through the paper noisily, making sure it crackled every time she turned a page or changed position in her seat. Don't you at least want to ask me how my weekend was? She pouted. Why would I want to do that? I assume you slept with him a few times. Isn't that what whores do when they cheat on their husbands? Gray asked. Well, we also went out and did some things and ate at some nice restaurants, she whimpered. Nice. Good for you, Gray said. Maybe one of your girlfriends will be interested. And your husband. So far, a husband. No. Gray noticed that his wife seemed far from as excited as he'd expected, especially after she'd made such a fuss about her departure. The fact that she wanted to talk about experiences unrelated to sex suggested that Johan might be proving to be more of a loser than a stud. But that's not my problem, Gray thought. On Monday, Gray spent time separating bank accounts and the financial maneuvering required by the impending divorce. He wouldn't be able to get an appointment with the family law attorney of his choice until a week later, so he knew he would have to live in the same house with Kelly for a while. Kelly spent the day avoiding Johan. She was well aware that they were on opposite sides of the spectrum regarding the success of the weekend, knew that their relationship had changed forever, and not for the better. She really wanted her husband to realize this and come back to her, so that with Gray's help, she could ward off Johan's future advances. Kelly's life suddenly became very complicated. Kelly contemplated whether to have another talk with Gray or just move on with her life as if nothing had happened, hoping that her husband would eventually cool down. She chose the second option as the path of least resistance, not wanting her husband to call her a whore again. After some time spent looking at the situation from all angles, Kelly had to admit that the word slut sounded much more accurate than loving wife. She shook her head sadly, wondering if she would have viewed the situation differently if her weekend had been a resounding success instead of a dismal failure. Gray didn't say a word to Kelly when he got home from work and when they sat down to dinner. When he finished eating, he muttered a short "thank you" and put his plate away. I'm sorry, Gray. I'm sorry, Kelly whimpered as Gray went into the living room. After all these years, I thought you loved me enough to give me a weekend away. Love you enough? I would have thought, after all these years, you loved me enough not to ask permission to be a whore, Gray said. How selfish and deluded do you have to be? The next day at work, things got even worse for Kelly. 5 minutes after she walked into her office, one of her best friends at the firm walked in and closed the door, which was not too common in the office. Please tell me you didn't spend the weekend having fun with Dutch Thor, Emma LaSalle asked in a half-whisper, even though the door was closed. Kelly's eyes went wide. Was he bragging? No, 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 no! She wheezed, her face contorted with shame and anger. I suppose if it's not coming from you, it's coming from him, Emma said, but I didn't hear it from him. I heard a couple of girls whispering about it in the break room while I was having coffee. If they're whispering at 8 in the morning, the whole office will be talking about it by noon. There's no hiding it now. Kelly put her head in her hands. Emma watched tears drip onto her desk. Yeah, you've become the girl every woman hates, and every guy's gonna want a piece of you. So, was it good? She asked, raising her eyebrows. That's the biggest problem. It wasn't. I pissed off my husband a lot, and for... What? She asked. Johan is big, handsome, charming, and a total pussy in bed. He's barely bigger than Gray and not even half the man in bed compared to him, but he thinks he's God's gift to women. Emma's shocked look turned to one of concern. So how long will it take you to win back your husband's affection? Emma asked without the slightest hint of a smile. I only wish it were that easy, Kelly replied. Gray talks about divorce all the time. 7 years together and he's always talking about divorce. Straight up. No, I'll think about it. No counseling, nothing. I thought he'd just get mad, but he's beyond furious. I've never seen him so reckless. And I warned him. Yeah, but if he didn't approve, your warning means nothing. You're a smart woman, and you really can't deny that you didn't know how it would end, Emma said. It just so happened that Gray said almost the exact same words to Kelly 2 weeks later when she called in tears after being served with divorce papers at the office. You told me I could have sex with him. Told me I could, she sobbed into the phone. No, I told you it was your choice, but it would have consequences. I didn't give you carte blanche to go out with that blonde bastard. You got what you wanted, and apparently it didn't matter what I wanted, Gray stated. A few weeks later, Gray received a call from his father-in-law and mother-in-law asking him to talk to their daughter and consider reconciliation. Gray loved his in-laws and had always gotten along well with them, so he tried to gently disappoint them. She says she made a mistake and you won't talk to her. You won't let her explain, his father-in-law accused him harshly. You're better than that, Gray. She made a mistake? Is that really what she called it? Gray said with more than a touch of irony in his voice. Well, she never actually told us what the mistake was, but after 7 years, don't you think you should do her some favors? Ken Clayton said. She didn't tell you the whole story, Ken. I wouldn't call it a mistake that she gave herself permission to sleep with a coworker over the weekend. I warned her that there would be consequences, said Gray. Oh. No. No. She couldn't have been that stupid, cried Ken. Gray didn't see fit to respond to what he was sure was a rather rhetorical remark. I'm sorry, said Ken. I don't know what else to say. I won't bother you again. The day after his conversation with her father, Gray groaned when he saw that Kelly was calling him. Another whine is coming, he thought. I'm sorry, Gray, about your father calling. I think you realize that I haven't been very honest with my parents. It's not something you confess unless you have to. I never thought he'd call, and I never thought you'd rat me out, she said quietly. I didn't rat you out, I told the truth, he replied emotionlessly. Yeah, she sighed. Kelly and her attorney tried to delay the divorce, but with Gray filing due to irreconcilable differences and the lack of children, it was 9 months later. Kelly couldn't believe Gray didn't give her a second chance after her mistake, as she repeatedly called it. The mistake wasn't just having sex with another man, Kelly, he explained one night when she tried to change his mind. Long before you cheated with him, you were having an emotional affair. You disregarded my feelings, disrespected me in the worst possible way. When did you stop loving me? Kelly held back tears. Once, when she'd cried, Gray had tried to comfort her. Now he accused her of trying to force her tears back into his heart. I know you still love me, Gray. Why can't we try to make up? Yes, I still love you. That's why it hurts so much, Gray replied. But I don't think you love me as much as I love you. I would never think of cheating on you, ever, but I can't believe that you won't do it again when a second man gets your attention. There won't be a second man. I promise, she quickly interjected. There shouldn't have been a first one either, Gray muttered. You promised that when you made your vows to me. Uh, oh yes, she whispered. During the time the divorce lasted, Johan had asked Kelly out several times, as had several of her other co-workers. Being made out to be a slut had gotten the woman talked about in the office, and a few weeks after the incident, she'd been called into HR. We don't have a policy prohibiting employees from dating, but we have always asked our employees to exercise some discretion. If half of your male employees are talking about how you spent the weekend playing Family Game with Johan Wegman, and half the women are speculating about who's next on your list, it's not a good situation. If the hype doesn't die down, you may be asked to move to another office. I've been told that Maine is very beautiful this time of year, said the HR director. A day later, Johan was in Kelly's face again and asked the woman for a date. After the HR director's warning, she was in no mood. "Come on, baby. Your husband is divorcing you. We won't even need to go out of town for the weekend," Johan said. "Can't you take a hint?" she snapped at him. "I ruined my marriage for mediocre sex that I just wanted. Mediocre! I was such an idiot. Now go away!" Kelly yelled. 2 weeks later, Kelly agreed to move to North Carolina. By the time she left, everyone in the company knew that Johan was not the stud he thought he was. A month later, Johan transferred back to the Amsterdam office. He's handsome, trim, and every Saturday morning he walks the aisles of the grocery store as if he's inhibited, as she noticed from a few feet away. He never seemed to notice her, which was the norm in her life. Margaret Scanlon, whom close friends called Peggy, worked as a fifth-grade teacher at a local elementary school. Her looks were average, her physique what she considered average, which meant she had nothing to attract a good-looking, obviously single man. She was 29 years old and due to cross the 30-year threshold in a few weeks, with no prospects of leaving bachelorhood anytime soon. Peggy was perplexed as to how a man as attractive as he was could still be single. He looked to be in his early 30s. He doesn't give the impression of a gambler. He looks, lost, maybe broken. Gray Penner doesn't have a wedding ring on his left hand, but Peggy determined he was single before she even looked at his hand. The items in his cart said all she needed to know about his marital status. Pop-Tarts, 2-layer cakes with filling and frosting, frozen pizza, macaroni and cheese, beer, and grilled meats. Nothing says bachelorhood, or maybe even divorce like these products. Peggy is what many people call a mouse. She has short, wavy, light brown hair, big brown eyes, and light, almost pale skin. She was 5'6", had medium-sized breasts, decent legs, and what she considered her best feature, a muscular, round ass. In terms of personality, she would call herself quiet. In college, her friends considered her the perfect partner due to her friendliness, loyalty, and mediocre looks. She had first noticed the man while passing by a few months before. For some reason that she still can't figure out, she kept noticing him, and about 2 months ago she started paying closer attention to him. Though it was completely out of character for her, she considered introducing herself to him. If only... "I know this may seem a little forward, but I'm Peggy Scanlon. Would you like to have a cup of coffee with me?" Peggy asked a few weeks later, approaching the man. Gray stepped back and looked closely at the woman who had just verbally addressed him. Sure, she wasn't stunning like Kelly, and not many people were, but there was something about the look in her eyes that made him agree. Something in her eyes made him want to know more about this mysterious woman. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't just being friendly with a woman. "Yes, I think that would be great," Gray replied readily. Peggy Scanlon was an open book. Moreover, she was easy to read. In her 29 years, she hadn't dated much, and never seriously. Seeming intelligent and well-read, he listened intently as she recounted her past. When she finished her story, she sat silently waiting for him to talk about her past. She looked carefully into his eyes and decided that he was single because he was divorced. In his eyes, she could read the pain that only someone who had been deeply wounded could know. She watched him ponder. She saw that he was trying to figure out exactly how much he should tell her about himself, and he told almost his entire story while she sat at intense attention. When he was done, they both sat in silence. He sighed heavily and looked at the woman as if the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. I'm sorry for dumping all this on you, he said, raising his eyes. You're the first person I've ever told the story to. I've been told I have that effect on people. I'm also pretty good with small children and dogs, the woman said. Gray chuckled. He felt very comfortable with this stranger, almost like he did with Kelly before. Before they went their separate ways, Gray set up a date for the following Friday evening. On the third date, they had sex for the first time. Peggy tried to last longer but proved to be the weaker partner. There was something incredibly sexy about Gray's calm, reserved demeanor that she couldn't resist, even though he never once made any overt maneuvers. After a pleasant dinner at a Hungarian restaurant, Gray invited Peggy to his apartment for coffee and alcohol. They first sat side by side in a two-seater chair in the living room, and then Peggy leaned over to Gray and nestled her lips against his. 10 minutes later, they were already lying naked in Gray's bedroom.
Peggy screamed at full voice before finally stopping moving.
Gray got up and for the next hour made gentle love to the woman. He noted to himself that this was the first time he had made love to someone since his divorce. The rest of the time, the sex had been simple intercourse. He made sure to kiss the woman during the session. You, she muttered, snuggling up to him after they were done. Shh, it's okay. We'll have plenty of time to talk later. What are you doing for the next few decades? He remarked. Peggy smiled tiredly at him, and he pressed his lips to hers. The woman who had been a bridesmaid 4 times was finally in the spotlight after a year. They subsequently had a couple of children, a boy 2 years after the wedding and a girl 2 more years later. Unlike her predecessor, Peggy never forgot her vows, and though Gray will never know it, Kelly will never forget that lesson either. A few years after moving to North Carolina, she remarried and remained faithful to her second husband for 15 years until she caught him cheating. She admitted to herself that she finally understood the pain Gray had gone through and wasted no time in divorcing her second husband. Kelly had always taken care of herself and still went to the gym regularly. In her 50s, she was still an attractive woman. Unmarried, single, and approaching 50 years of age, something she had never envisioned even in her wildest dreams. Her second husband was 10 years older than her, had no children, and didn't want to have any with Kelly. Now, it was too late, though she knew there were plenty of 30-year-old men who would gladly stick a baby inside her, but none of them wanted to stick around and be anything more than a partner. She laughed out loud, more like even barked. Gray had wanted 2 children, she wanted 3. So by now, all 3 of the couple's children would be in their teens. She and Gray would be attending various school and community events, sports, music, parenting. Graduations, both high school and college, were just around the corner, followed by weddings and grandchildren. And all of that is gone. For the sake of the optional sex. What a dumbass she was. She shook her head sadly, probably for the 1,000th time. If she had been flexible enough, she would have kicked her own ass. A few months later, on the other side of the country, Gray and Peggy Penner, along with their 15-year-old son Reggie, sat in the gym at the local high school and watched their 18-year-old daughter Phyllis receive her diploma. Peggy squeezed her husband's hand, and they exchanged glances with happy tears in their eyes. Gray leaned over and gave his wife a quick peck on the lips, making his son wince with teenage embarrassment. "Well, that's enough, you two. Not here and not now," he whined. His parents smiled at him, then at each other, and both raised their eyebrows.